Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, the Toronto Maple Leafs have traded forward Nic Roy to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for a first and a fifth round pick. So let's talk about the trade and what could be next for the Maple Leafs at this year's deadline. We talked about a guy like Ekman-Larsson in yesterday's video, but again, if the Maple Leafs truly are retooling, you need guys who can help you win now, which Ekman-Larsson can do, but also in the future. And for a guy who's 34, turning 35, how good is he going to be beyond this season? And if you can get a first round pick and maybe even something else on top of that for him, you have to consider trading it. So if we're looking at what next year's roster could look like and what it could mean for what's to come at this year's deadline, there's obviously guys like Bobby McMann and Scott Laughton, maybe even a guy like Troy Stetcher, Troy Yarncroke, or UFAs, where if you could trade them, great. Trade them. I know that there's some talk about potentially extending Bobby McMann and Scott Laughton, but again, you have to be able to take advantage of it. If they really want to stay and if you really want them back, throw some money at them on July 1st. Now is not the time. You need the assets. And going into next season, they could have as much as $24.7 million to work with, and that's with 3 goaltenders on the roster. And that could potentially be as high as almost $31 million if they were to look to move on from guys like Ekman-Larsson, Simone Benoit, and Steven Lorentz, who they're apparently receiving phone calls on. Something to note on Ekman-Larsson is he does have a 16-team no trade, so he does really control where he ends up, and it sounds like he does want to stay a Maple Leaf. I wouldn't hate it if he stayed, but at the same time, I would be disappointed if they weren't able to cash in on that player. But if he's here next year, and he's just as good as he is this season, the Leafs are going to need a player like him. So it could kind of go either way. According to Elliot Friedman, the initial ask for Bobby McMann, and this was before the Olympic break, was a first-round pick. And if the Maple Leafs are able to get a first-round pick for Bobby McMann, then great. But if they have to settle for what the Vancouver Canucks got for Kiefer Sherwood, which was 2 second-round picks, I wouldn't be upset with that either. We talked about it in yesterday's video, but even after acquiring a first and a fifth round pick in the Nic Roy trade, the Maple Leafs still don't have a plethora of assets to work with if they are going to retool this team. But like we've highlighted here, they do have a decent amount of cap space to work with, and cap space is an asset, right? They still do have to fill out the rest of this roster, and they're going to need the cap space. But if you are trading a guy like Ekman-Larsson and teams don't want to give you a first-round pick, or they do, and maybe it's just a middling prospect, maybe you look to retain some salary there to get a better prospect or to get a better draft pick. And for guys like Bobby McMann and Scott Laughton, it's a foregone conclusion. They will retain salary on those guys, but it's not going to affect next season at all because they're going to be unrestricted free agents at the end of this year. But if you can maybe take back a contract, and I'm not just saying to take back some dead money, a guy that you don't think can be useful, I'm saying to look for a guy who's maybe, making $3, $4, $5 million or whatever like that, and that you think you can get more out of, or that you think fits on your roster, and take that player back. And maybe that other team gives you just a little bit more in that return. Maybe you do get a first round pick for Bobby McMann instead of just 2 seconds. The Maple Leafs need this year's trade deadline to be successful, because if it's not, we're going to find ourselves right back where we are next season as well. And I don't know if I could sit through that. Going into this year's deadline, I really didn't know what to expect, right? The Maple Leafs say they want a first-round pick for Ekman-Larsson. They want a first-round pick for Bobby McMann. They want a first-round pick for Nic Roy. And if they come out of this deadline with 3 first-round picks, I'll be absolutely blown away. But the fact that we're sitting here and they've only made 1 trade and they've got one of the first-round picks already is making me feel a lot more optimistic about what next season could look like. Because if you're able to get another first between Ekman-Larsson and Bobby McMann, you're putting yourself in a real position to go out this offseason and maybe flip those 2 first-rounders for something that can really help your roster. If they come away from this deadline with a first-round pick for Nic Roy, a first-round pick for Ekman-Larsson, 2 second-round picks for Bobby McMann, and whatever they get for Scott Laughton, guys like Michael McCarron and Nick Dowd are being traded for second-rounders and even more than that. If they're coming away from this deadline with 2 first-round picks and 3 second-rounders, you can use those assets to go and fill some of these holes. You know, if you want to bump John Tavares lower in the lineup, you want to acquire a second line center, you could probably do that with those assets. If you wanted to acquire another top four defenseman here, you could probably do that with those assets. You probably couldn't do both, but if you wanted to acquire a forward or a defenseman via trade, well, then maybe you look to sign one in free agency that helps this team, and maybe you fill out the rest of the roster with, you know, some value options. I talked about in yesterday's video, I wanted the Maple Leafs to sign James Van Riemsdyk, Anthony Mantha, Brent Burns, and Justin Brazeau this year. You can make fun of me for those names, but Manta's got 21 goals, 45 points. JVR's got 16 goals. Brazeau's got 16 goals, and Brent Burns has almost 30 points. All four of those guys combined make about $10 million. You can find some value adds in free agency. You can trade for a guy. You can sign a big fish, and this team can be retooled. You know, and if I'm sounding optimistic, it's because we're seeing a path. The yellow brick road is starting to appear here. And that doesn't mean that, you know, I'm not saying they're going to make the conference finals next year. I'm not saying they're going to win the cup. But oh my God, can they be a little bit better than they are this season? Can they be watchable? Can they make the playoffs? Can they be competitive? Probably. I know I've got Morgan Rielly on my roster here, and I haven't talked about him. That's a topic for an entire video. I could do 10, 15 minutes on it. But for the people who are still watching here, I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek, you know, what I'm thinking here. I think the Maple Leafs need to fire Craig Berube. And that's not me giving Morgan Rielly an excuse here, but you know, Morgan Rielly is an offensive defenseman. He's not good defensively. And the Maple Leafs spend an alarming amount of time without the puck. They are outshot and outpossessed every single game pretty much this season. You know, the less time you spend with the puck, the less opportunities you're giving Morgan Rielly to show you what he's good at. Instead, all you're seeing is the stuff that he's bad at, and we've known that of him for years now. So it's not a surprise to me that he doesn't fit well in this system, but I don't think several other players fit in this system. So I think that they need to fire the coach. But if they are to move on from Morgan, I saw a really good analogy on Twitter the other day. You know, towards the end of Brian McCabe's career, it felt sort of like a kindness, like a mercy, almost. They traded that man to Florida because we wanted it to be over. In Morgan, it has a little bit, it is a little bit of a similar feel to that situation where it's kind of cruel to keep running him out there at this point, and just getting absolutely carved up. I think he needs a fresh start. I think the Maple Leafs need a bit of a fresh start. But what I would not do is I am not giving up assets to move that player. If somebody just wants to take the contract, sure. But the Maple Leafs have more than enough cap space to do whatever they want, basically, with this roster without needing to move Morgan Rielly off of it. Maybe they bump him lower in the lineup. They give him lesser responsibility, and maybe he's able to play well in a third pair role. You know, and that would be disappointing because he makes $7.5 million. I know. You know, I'm basically doing the Morgan Rielly video right here, right now, but I'm trying to give you a little bit of insight here into what I'm thinking. I'm not giving up. The Maple Leafs have too few assets to spend assets to get rid of Morgan Rielly when they have more than enough cap space to basically do whatever they want. I think there's a better solution. Just to show you how much cap space they really do have, you know, let's get crazy here for a second. Let's say the Maple Leafs went out and acquired Dougie Hamilton, because I don't think that it would cost you very much to do it. The Devils basically just want to get rid of him. Maybe it's a second round pick. Maybe it's a second and a third. Maybe it's even less than that. Anyway, if they didn't retain a dime and the Leafs took back all $9 million, and maybe they spent a couple of their first and hypothetical second round picks that they may or may not get back at the deadline, and they acquired a center making $8 million, they would still have $12.3 million left to fill out the rest of this roster here with Morgan Rielly still here. You know, this team has a lot of needs and very few assets, even if they are able to pull off, you know, a miracle and have this much of a successful deadline as they're setting themselves up to have. I'm not wasting assets on dumping that contract just to free up the cap space when they have more than enough cap space. And this is before they decide what they do with their thruple in net here, Stolarz, Woll, and Hildeby. They could keep all three, but maybe they move one, and maybe that helps you net more assets to fill out the rest of the roster. I don't know. But $12.3 million here with Rielly still on the roster, I would rather fire the coach and cut his minutes even more, right? To see if he could be successful in a third pair. The Leafs need players. They need guys. They need bodies. They need guys to play on this team. And I'm not shipping out assets to get rid of Rielly. But if another team does want to take him and we can sort of move on and reset, sure, I'm open to it. But anyway, I've been rambling for a little bit now. The video is probably longer than it needs to be because all of this is going to be outdated real quick when all the trades come in tomorrow. But hopefully we are talking Saturday about all the picks and prospects that Brad was able to bring us. And maybe I'm being too optimistic, right? I don't like to get too high or too low in these videos, but, you know, and I know I haven't made videos in a long time, but my feeling about this team has been so low for all of this season, pretty much into last summer as well, that this is a step in the right direction. It's a pretty big step in the right direction, but it's just one step in several that they need to take between now and being, I don't want to say contenders because of how bad they've been this season, but being a playoff team again, you know? If Brad were to kick up his feet at this point and say, look at me, I got a first round pick for Nic Roy, we'd be real disappointed Friday at 3 or 4 o'clock, whenever the deadline is. This is a good start, but they need to keep building on it. So make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more, because more will be on the way, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.